The first thing he noticed wasn't the gavel. It was the way the room had already decided who he was. Quiet, black, alone, guilty. Marcus Hill stood at the defense table, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his posture calm in a way that unsettled people who preferred visible fear. He wore a simple gray suit, pressed but modest, and a tie that had seen better days. Nothing about him demanded attention. Nothing about him begged for sympathy. And yet, everything about him was being judged. "Mr. Hill," Judge Raymond Keller said, peering down from the bench with a faint, practiced smile. "You understand the charges brought against you?" Marcus lifted his eyes, meeting the judge's gaze without defiance, without submission, just clarity. "I understand what's being said," he replied softly. "Yes, Your Honor." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The phrasing bothered them. Not what's true. What's being said? Judge Keller tapped his gavel lightly, more for effect than necessity. "You are accused of grand larceny and embezzlement from your employer. A very serious offense," Marcus nodded once. "I'm aware." What he didn't say was that the employer, a large financial firm, had already labeled him the perfect culprit. He had been the quiet one in the office, the one who stayed late, the one who didn't argue, didn't gossip, didn't defend himself loudly when things went wrong. The easy one, the disposable one. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began smoothly, "we have clear documentation linking Mr. Hill to unauthorized transfers totaling over $200,000. More murmurs. Louder this time. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react, because he had seen this before, not in this courtroom, not in this exact form, but in the way people filled silence with assumptions, in the way kindness was mistaken for weakness, in the way dignity was treated like an admission of guilt. Judge Keller leaned forward slightly, studying Marcus with an interest that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" There was a pause, a long one. Marcus exhaled slowly, then spoke. "I didn't do it." Simple, direct, unembellished. The courtroom felt almost disappointed. No dramatic speech, no emotional plea, no desperation. Just truth, quiet and unadorned. Judge Keller's lips pressed into a thin line. "That will be for the court to determine." But something in his tone suggested the determination had already been made. Outside the courtroom, the air felt heavier than it should have. Reporters lingered near the steps, whispering into microphones, crafting narratives before the facts had a chance to breathe. Marcus stepped past them without a word, his expression unchanged. "Mr. Hill," one of them called out, "do you deny the charges?" He paused briefly, turning his head just enough to acknowledge the voice. "Yes," he said. Nothing more. Then he kept walking. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered, not for him, not really, but for the spectacle. People liked stories they could understand quickly, stories with clear villains. Marcus didn't fit their expectations of innocence. He didn't look outraged enough, didn't fight loudly enough, didn't perform. And so, in their eyes, he must be hiding something. What no one saw was what happened later that evening. A woman struggling with a broken-down car on a dimly lit road. A man in a gray suit pulling over without hesitation. "You okay?" Marcus asked gently. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were tired, worried. I think so. The car just died. I don't know what to do." Marcus glanced at the engine, then at the empty road. "Pop the hood," he said. For the next 20 minutes, he worked quietly, his hands steady, his voice calm as he explained what he was doing. When the engine finally turned over again, the woman let out a relieved laugh. "Oh my God, thank you. I don't even know how to repay you." Marcus wiped his hands on a cloth he kept in his car. "You don't have to," he said. She hesitated, studying his face. "Wait, aren't you?" He smiled faintly. "Just someone who saw you needed help." And then he left. Back in his chambers, Judge Keller poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the low light. He felt good. The case was clean, efficient, another conviction that would reinforce his reputation, firm, decisive, uncompromising, exactly what people expected, exactly what kept certain people satisfied. He glanced at the file again, tapping it lightly. Marcus Hill, too quiet, too calm, too something. It irritated him. People who didn't react properly always did. Still, the evidence was in place. The narrative airtight, the outcome inevitable, or so he believed. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. Tighter, charged. Marcus stood in the same place, wearing the same calm expression. But this time, he wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit sat behind him. His presence subtle but unmistakably authoritative. He didn't speak. Didn't draw attention, but people noticed. Judge Keller's eyes flickered toward him just for a second. "Proceed," the judge said, his tone sharper than before. The prosecutor began again, outlining the case with practiced precision. "And then, Your Honor," the man behind Marcus said, standing. His voice was calm. Measured, but it carried. Every head turned. Judge Keller frowned. "And you are?" The man stepped forward, placing a badge on the table with deliberate care. "My name is Daniel Brooks," he said. "Assistant Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room froze. "I'm here because this case," he continued, "is part of a larger federal investigation into financial fraud, evidence tampering, and judicial misconduct." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. Unavoidable. Judge Keller's face tightened. "I don't appreciate—" "I'm sure you don't," Brooks interrupted gently. "But appreciation isn't required." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Marcus. "Mr. Hill has been working with us for the past 18 months. A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. Marcus remained still, unchanged. "Undercover," Brooks added, "tracking a network that launders money through corporate structures, with assistance from individuals in positions of power." His gaze returned to the judge. "Individuals like you." The words landed like a hammer. Judge Keller's hand tightened around the gavel. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "You have no—" "We have everything," Brooks said calmly. He placed a file on the bench. Records, transfers, communications, and a pattern of rulings that conveniently benefited the same network. The judge's composure began to crack. "You're making a mistake," he said, but the certainty was gone. Brooks didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "The only mistake," he said, "was assuming the quiet man wouldn't be seen." All eyes turned to Marcus. For the first time, the room really looked at him. Not as a suspect, not as a stereotype, but as a person. The arrest was swift, public, unavoidable. Judge Keller, once untouchable, was led out in handcuffs, his authority stripped away in front of the very people he had judged. And Marcus? He stood where he had always stood. Calm, steady, human. Later that day, the same reporters who had questioned him gathered again. "Mr. Hill," one of them asked, voice softer now, "why didn't you say anything sooner?" Marcus paused, considering the question. "Because it wasn't about me," he said. They leaned in. "It was about stopping something bigger," he continued. "And sometimes that takes patience." Another reporter spoke up. "Weren't you angry? Being treated that way?" Marcus's expression shifted slightly, not to anger, but to something deeper. "Of course," he said. "I'm human." He glanced at the crowd. "But anger doesn't fix what's broken. People do." There was a quiet in his words that carried more weight than any speech. "Kindness does," he added. "Even when it's not returned." That evening, as the city moved on, as it always does, Marcus found himself back on a quiet street. Another car, another stranger, another moment where he could choose to walk away. He didn't. Because who he was had never depended on who others thought he was. And maybe that was the real story. Not the corruption, not the power, but the quiet, stubborn humanity of a man who refused to let the world make him smaller, even when it tried, even when it almost succeeded. And in the end, that humanity didn't just expose the truth. It changed it.